In the mountains of Afghanistan, where loyalty means life and betrayal means death, one woman's finger on a trigger would decide the fate of 301 abandoned soldiers. This isn't just another war story.
This is the account of Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a sniper whose deadly accuracy became legend, whose trust was shattered by those she served, and whose return from the dead would ignite a storm that would shake the very foundations of military command. They called her Ghost because she could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and vanish without a trace.
Her superiors called her expendable. Her enemies called her unstoppable. But when the smoke cleared and the truth emerged from the ashes of a classified mission gone wrong, the world would call her something else entirely, the woman who refused to let 381 heroes burn in silence. Some say revenge is best served cold. Sarah Chen served hers with precision, one shot at a time, in a campaign that would expose corruption reaching the highest levels of command and prove that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one firing at you from across the battlefield. It's the one sitting safely behind a desk, signing death warrants disguised as mission orders. This is her story. This is their story. This is the story of what happens when the abandoned refuse to stay buried. The morning Sarah Chen received her deployment orders, she was cleaning her rifle on the roof of the forward operating base, watching the sun paint the Afghan mountains gold.
She had been in country for 8 months with 47 confirmed kills and a reputation that made even hardened infantry soldiers speak in hushed tones when she passed. At 28, she was one of the deadliest snipers in the entire theater, a woman who could put a bullet through a coin at 800 meters and make it look effortless.
The orders came through Captain Morrison, a desk officer who rarely left the safety of the command bunker. His soft hands and clean uniform made Sarah's jaw tighten as he approached, clipboard in hand like a shield against the reality of war surrounding him.
"Chen, you're being reassigned," Morrison said, not bothering with pleasantries. "Special reconnaissance mission.
High priority classified level." Sarah continued cleaning her rifle, not looking up.
"Where?" "Grid coordinates will be provided during briefing. You'll be working with Alpha Company 3rd Battalion. They're conducting a sweep operation in the Korengal Valley." The Korengal Valley.
Sarah knew the name well. Every soldier in Afghanistan knew it.
The media called it the Valley of Death for good reason. It was a narrow corridor of mountains and villages, where the enemy had turned every rock, every building, every shadow into a potential ambush point.
American forces had been fighting there for years, gaining ground during the day only to lose it again at night.
"How many men?"
Sarah asked.
381 soldiers total. You'll be providing overwatch and intelligence gathering. Mission duration is estimated at 72 hours.
Did Mrs. Benwatt sabotage of self-arrival? Then is Benwatt sabotage of self-arrival? And then showed us a sadness affecting the size?
Something was off. The man couldn't meet her eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the clipboard. In her months of service, she had learned to read people like topographic maps, noting every detail that might mean the difference between life and death. "What's the real mission, Captain?" "I just told you the real mission, Lieutenant. Report to Briefing Room Delta at 1400 hours. That's an order." After Morrison left, Sarah sat alone on the rooftop, her rifle across her lap. The mountains stretched endlessly before her, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. She had seen too many good soldiers die in those peaks. Too many families received folded flags instead of homecoming hugs. But something about this mission felt different. Wrong. The briefing room was packed when Sarah arrived. She recognized most of the faces, seasoned soldiers who had survived multiple deployments through skill, luck, and the kind of brotherhood that only forms under fire. There was Sergeant Miller, a machine gunner from Detroit who sent half his pay home to his mother. Corporal Washington, barely 20 years old but already a veteran of 3 firefights. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had postponed his wedding twice to extend his deployment because his men needed him. These weren't expendable soldiers. These were some of the best fighters in the entire region. Colonel Bradley stood at the front of the room, his weathered face grim as he addressed the assembled troops. Sarah had served under Bradley before and respected him. He was old-school military, the kind of officer who earned loyalty through competence and genuine concern for his soldiers. "Gentleman and lady," Bradley nodded toward Sarah. "You're about to undertake one of the most important missions in this sector. Intelligence indicates a high-value target is operating from a compound in the Korengal Valley. This individual is responsible for coordinating attacks that have killed dozens of American soldiers over the past 6 months." Bradley clicked a remote, and a satellite image appeared on the screen behind him. The compound looked like dozens of others Sarah had seen. A collection of mud brick buildings surrounded by walls, situated in a valley surrounded by steep mountain ridges. The target goes by the name Scorpion. Real identity unknown, but communications intercepts suggest he's planning a major offensive against our supply routes.
Your mission is to locate, identify, and eliminate this threat. Sarah raised her hand.
Sir, what's the extraction plan? Bradley's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Sarah caught it. Extraction will be via helicopter once the objective is secured.
Landing zone coordinates will be provided once you're in position. The mission began before dawn 3 days later.
381 soldiers loaded into helicopters and transport vehicles, carrying enough equipment and ammunition for what everyone expected to be a fierce battle. Sarah rode in the lead helicopter, her customized rifle secured beside her, scanning the terrain below through night vision goggles. The Corangal Valley spread beneath them like a wound in the earth, narrow and treacherous. The helicopter pilots were nervous. She could tell from their radio chatter. This wasn't routine transport duty. The valley was known for its surface-to-air missiles and rocket-propelled grenades. Flying here was like painting a target on your aircraft. 2 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her rifle, a modified M405, was her primary weapon, but she also carried a sidearm, enough ammunition for an extended firefight, and a radio that would keep her connected to command.
Most importantly, she carried a small digital camera that she used to document targets and confirm kills. Every sniper needed proof.
The helicopter landed in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. Sarah was the first, one out, immediately taking a knee and scanning the surrounding ridgelines through her scope.
The other soldiers deployed with practiced efficiency, forming a perimeter, while the helicopters lifted off and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Rodriguez approached her position.
Chen, I want you up on that ridgeline. He pointed to a rocky outcrop about 600 meters away. You'll have clear sight lines into the target compound and the entire valley. If things go sideways, we'll need your eyes and your rifle. Sarah nodded and began the climb.
The mountains of Afghanistan were unforgiving, all loose rock and hidden crevices that could break an ankle or worse. But she had grown up hiking in the Colorado Rockies, and the physical challenges of mountain warfare felt familiar.
What concerned her was the tactical situation. 381 soldiers was a large force, larger than necessary for a single high-value target. Either command expected massive resistance, or there was something about this mission she hadn't been told. She reached her position just as the sun crested the mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. Through her scope, she could see the target compound clearly. It looked quiet, almost abandoned. No guards visible, no movement in the courtyard, no signs of the sophisticated enemy operation they had been briefed about. Overwatch in position, she radioed to Rodriguez. Compound appears inactive. Copy that, Ghost. Maintain observation. Alpha Company is beginning approach. Sarah watched through her scope as the soldiers moved down the valley in textbook formation, using cover and concealment, advancing in short rushes while others provided cover and fire positions. These men knew their business. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be because of tactical mistakes on their part. The attack came from everywhere at once. Sarah saw the muzzle flashes erupting from concealed positions all along the ridgelines before she heard the gunfire. Machine guns, rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, all focused on the soldiers trapped in the valley below. It was a perfect ambush, planned and coordinated with military precision. Contact. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. We're taking fire from multiple positions. Sarah immediately began engaging targets, her rifle barking as she sent precision rounds into enemy positions. She could see the muzzle flashes, could calculate range and windage instinctively, but there were too many of them. For every enemy fighter she eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. The battle lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of desperate fighting, as 381 American soldiers found themselves surrounded and outnumbered. Sarah's rifle grew hot from continuous firing, her ammunition running dangerously low. But she kept shooting. Every round had to count. Every shot was the difference between a fellow soldier making it home or becoming another casualty statistic. We need immediate extraction, Rodriguez was shouting into his radio. Heavy casualties, multiple wounded. Where are those helicopters? Sarah could see the devastation below. Bodies scattered across the valley floor, wounded soldiers trying to find cover behind rocks and in shell craters. The enemy fire was relentless, coordinated, professional. This wasn't a ragtag group of insurgents. This was a well-trained military force that had been waiting for them. Command, this is Ghost, Sarah transmitted on her radio. We are in a kill zone. Repeat, we are in a coordinated ambush. Request immediate air support and extraction. The response that came back made her blood freeze. Ghost, this is Command. Maintain position and continue mission.
Air support is not available at this time. Command, we have massive casualties down here. These soldiers need medical evacuation now. Ghost, you are ordered to maintain radio silence and continue observation. That is a direct order. Sarah stared at her radio in disbelief. Command was refusing to send help. 381 soldiers were dying in the valley below, and Command was ordering her to watch it happen. She keyed her radio again. Command, I am declaring a tactical emergency. These soldiers require immediate extraction, or they will all be killed. Ghost, you are in violation of direct orders. Cease all unauthorized transmissions immediately. That's when Sarah realized the truth. This wasn't a mission to capture or kill a high-value target. This was an execution. Someone had deliberately sent 381 soldiers into a kill zone knowing they would be slaughtered. The question was why. She watched helplessly as the battle raged below. Her fellow soldiers, men she had served with, eaten with, shared jokes and fears with, were being systematically murdered while their own command refused to help them.
Rodriguez was still moving among his men, trying to organize a defense, but Sarah could see through her scope that he was badly wounded, blood soaking through his uniform. By sunset, the shooting had stopped. The valley was silent, except for the wind moving through the rocks and the occasional groan of wounded men. Of the 381 soldiers who had entered the valley that morning, Sarah could count fewer than 50 still moving. The rest lay scattered across the rocky ground, their mission complete in the most horrible way possible. Sarah remained in her hide position through the night, watching, documenting, recording. Her camera captured the aftermath, the systematic execution of wounded soldiers by enemy fighters, the stripping of equipment and weapons from American dead. She recorded it all, evidence of what would certainly be classified as one of the worst military disasters of the entire war. When dawn broke on the second day, enemy fighters began moving through the valley in organized search patterns. They were looking for survivors, finishing what the ambush had started. Sarah realized they would eventually find her position. Her radio had been silent for hours. Command, apparently content to let her die along with everyone else. She gathered her equipment and began moving along the ridgeline, staying low, using every piece of cover available. Her sniper training had taught her how to remain invisible, how to move without being seen, how to survive when survival seemed impossible. But she was one woman against what appeared to be several hundred enemy fighters, in terrain they knew better than she did, with no support coming from her own forces. For 3 days, Sarah played a deadly game of hide-and-seek through the mountains. She ate snow for water and rationed the few energy bars in her pack. She watched enemy patrols pass within meters of her hiding spots, staying motionless for hours while they searched for any American survivors. At night, she moved, always working her way toward what she hoped would be friendly territory. On the 4th night, exhausted and nearly out of ammunition, Sarah finally reached a Pakistani border checkpoint. The guards were suspicious of the American soldier who appeared out of the darkness, but her identification in desperate condition convinced them she was legitimate. They provided medical attention, food, and most importantly, communication with American forces. But when Sarah tried to report what had happened in the Korengal Valley, she discovered that the official version of events was very different from what she had witnessed. According to military records, the mission had been a success. The high-value target Scorpion had been eliminated, and casualties were described as light to moderate. There was no mention of 381 soldiers, no record of the massive ambush, no acknowledgement that anyone except Sarah had even been in the valley. When she demanded to speak with Colonel Bradley, she was told he had been transferred to another command. 1. Assassin. When she asked about Lieutenant Rodriguez and the other soldiers she had served with, she was told those names were not in the system. According to the United States Army, the men who had died in the Korengal Valley had never existed. That's when Sarah Chen realized she was facing an enemy more dangerous than any she had encountered on the battlefield. Someone with the power to erase 381 soldiers from official records. Someone who could classify a massacre as a success. Someone who was willing to murder American troops to cover up something even worse. She had survived the ambush, survived the mountains, survived the enemy. But as she sat in a sterile debriefing room being told that her memories were classified and her photographs were being confiscated, Sarah realized that her real war was just beginning. 3 months after the Korengal Valley massacre, Sarah Chen was officially dead. The military death certificate listed her cause of death as killed in action during classified operations, and her family received a folded flag along with a letter of condolence signed by a general whose name meant nothing to them. Her belongings were shipped home in a standard-issue military footlocker,
Everything carefully inspected and sanitized to remove any trace of what had really happened in Afghanistan. But Sarah was very much alive, recovering in a private medical facility in Germany under an assumed identity. The bullet scar on her shoulder was healing, the one she had received during her escape from the mountains, but the psychological wounds ran much deeper. Every night she saw the faces of the soldiers who had died in the valley. Rodriguez, Miller, Washington, and hundreds of others whose names she had memorized from their dog tags and personal effects, scattered across the battlefield. The man responsible for keeping her alive was someone she had never expected to help her, Colonel Bradley. The officer she had respected was apparently as much a victim of the conspiracy as she was, having been forcibly retired and threatened with court-martial when he tried to investigate what had happened to his soldiers. Bradley had used his remaining contacts in military intelligence to fake Sarah's death and arrange for her medical treatment, but his resources were limited and his enemies were powerful.
"They're calling it Operation Clean Sweep," Bradley explained during one of his visits to the facility. He looked older than Sarah remembered, his hair completely gray now, his eyes carrying the weight of betrayal by the institution he had served for 30 years.
Officially, it was a successful counterterrorism operation that eliminated a major threat. Unofficially, it was designed to eliminate evidence of something much larger. Sarah sat up in her hospital bed, her shoulders still stiff from the gunshot wound. Evidence of what? Arms dealing.
Drug trafficking. Systematic theft of military equipment and supplies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The 381 soldiers who died in that valley weren't just casualties, Sarah. They were witnesses who had seen too much, asked too many questions, or simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Bradley pulled out a folder filled with photographs and documents. "I've been investigating this for months, using unofficial channels and contacts who aren't part of the conspiracy."
The corruption goes all the way to the Pentagon. High-ranking officers, defense contractors, even some members of Congress. They've been using the war as cover for the largest military theft operation in American history. Sarah studied the documents, her anger growing with each page.
Financial records showing massive discrepancies in equipment inventories, shipping manifests that didn't match delivery receipts.
Photographs of American military weapons being sold in black markets across the Middle East. And at the center of it all, a network of officers and civilian officials who were getting rich while soldiers died.
The soldiers in the valley had been investigating supply irregularities, Bradley continued. Rodriguez had filed several reports about missing equipment.
Miller had questioned why ammunition deliveries never matched requisition orders. They were getting close to exposing the whole operation, so someone decided to eliminate the problem permanently.
By murdering 381 American soldiers. By sending them into an ambush orchestrated with enemy forces who were probably paid with stolen American weapons and money, then covering it up by erasing all records of their existence and declaring the mission a success.
Sarah felt rage building inside her, a cold, focused anger that she recognized from her sniper training. Who gave the orders? That's what I'm still trying to determine.
The operational orders came through classified channels, but the ultimate authority is hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and classification levels. Whoever is running this operation is smart, careful, and has access to the highest levels of military command.
Bradley stood to leave but paused at the door. "Sarah, I need you to understand something.
As far as the world knows, you're dead. That gives you an advantage, but it also makes you incredibly vulnerable. If they discover you're alive, they won't hesitate to kill you permanently. These people have already murdered hundreds of soldiers to protect their secret. One more death won't matter to them." After Bradley left, Sarah lay in the darkness thinking about her options. She could disappear, assume a new identity, and spend the rest of her life running from shadows. She could try to expose the conspiracy through official channels, though Bradley's experience suggested that would only get her killed. Or she could do what she had been trained to do, hunt her enemies with patience, precision, and deadly efficiency. She chose to hunt. Sarah's transformation began with her official resurrection. Using contacts in the intelligence community who owed Bradley favors, they created a new identity for her. Elena Vasquez, a freelance photographer and journalist specializing in conflict zones. The identity was backed up with authentic documentation, a carefully constructed personal history, and enough financial resources to operate independently. But Sarah's real preparation was much more extensive. She spent 6 months training in facilities across Europe, honing skills that went far beyond military sniper training. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, computer hacking, document forgery, and most importantly, how to kill quietly and without leaving evidence. The woman who had been one of the military's deadliest snipers became something much more dangerous,
an assassin with a personal mission. Her first target was Captain Morrison, the desk officer who had delivered her deployment orders. Sarah had suspected from the beginning that Morrison knew more about the mission than he had admitted, and her investigation confirmed that he was one of the lower-level coordinators in the conspiracy. He had been promoted twice since the Korengal Valley operation, now serving as a logistics coordinator at a major supply depot in Germany. Sarah found Morrison in a bar near his base, drunk and bragging to anyone who would listen about his connections and his role in classified operations that kept America safe. He was sloppy, overconfident, the kind of officer who felt protected by his rank and his bureaucratic position. She followed him home, studying his routine for 2 weeks. Morrison lived alone in a small apartment, worked regular hours, and had no close personal relationships that would complicate her mission. He was isolated, vulnerable, and completely unaware that he was being hunted by someone he believed was dead.
Sarah entered his apartment on a Thursday night using lock-picking skills she had learned from a former CIA operative in Prague. Morrison was asleep, snoring heavily after another night of drinking.
She woke him by placing the muzzle of her silenced pistol against his forehead. "Hello, Captain. Remember me?" Morrison's eyes went wide with terror as he recognized her face. "You're dead. The reports said you were killed in action." "The reports were wrong. But you knew that, didn't you? You knew exactly what was going to happen in the Korengal Valley. I don't know what you're talking about." "I just delivered orders. I didn't plan anything." Sarah pressed the pistol harder against his skin. 381 soldiers, Captain. I want names. I want to know who gave the orders, who planned the ambush, who decided that American soldiers were expendable. Morrison was sweating now, his hands shaking as he stared into Sarah's cold, focused eyes. "I can't tell you that. They'll kill me. I'm going to kill you anyway, Captain. The only question is whether you die quickly or very, very slowly." For the next hour, Sarah extracted information from Morrison with the same methodical precision she used for long-range shooting. He told her about the network of officers involved in the theft operation, about the meetings where soldiers' lives were discussed like inventory numbers, about the payments and promotions that bought silence and cooperation. Most importantly, he gave her names and locations of other people involved in the conspiracy. When she was finished questioning him, Sarah kept her promise. Morrison died quickly, a single shot to the head that left no evidence of torture or interrogation. To anyone investigating his death, it would appear to be a suicide brought on by guilt and alcohol abuse. Sarah left a typed suicide note confessing to unspecified crimes against fellow soldiers, ensuring that Morrison's death would raise questions about military corruption without revealing her involvement. Over the next 8 months, Sarah systematically eliminated 12 more people involved in the conspiracy. A logistics officer in Italy who had coordinated weapon shipments to black market dealers. A Pentagon analyst who had falsified casualty reports. A defense contractor who had knowingly shipped defective equipment that resulted in soldier deaths. Each death was carefully planned and executed to appear natural or accidental. Part of Sarah's campaign to create fear and paranoia among the conspirators, without revealing her survival. But her most important targets remained beyond her reach. The high-ranking officials who had actually ordered the Korengal Valley massacre were protected by layers of security and bureaucracy. They moved in diplomatic circles, lived in heavily guarded facilities, and maintained the kind of public profiles that made assassination extremely difficult. Sarah needed a different approach. Her opportunity came through Marcus Webb, an investigative journalist who had been trying to expose military corruption for years. Webb had connections throughout the defense establishment, sources who fed him information about waste, fraud, and abuse in military contracting. Most importantly, he had a reputation for protecting his sources and a platform that could reach millions of people. Sarah contacted Webb through encrypted channels, identifying herself as a military whistleblower with information about a major scandal. She didn't reveal her true identity or her personal mission of vengeance, presenting herself instead as a conscience-stricken officer who had witnessed crimes against American soldiers. "What I'm going to tell you will sound impossible," Sarah told Webb during their first encrypted video call. She was wearing a disguise and speaking through voice modulation software, but her information was devastating. High-ranking military officers are systematically murdering American soldiers to cover up a theft operation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Webb was skeptical at first, but Sarah provided documentation, financial records, and detailed accounts that no outsider could have fabricated. She gave him enough evidence to begin an investigation, but withheld the most damaging information until he proved he was serious about exposing the truth. "I need names," Webb said. "Specific individuals responsible for specific crimes. Without that, this is just another conspiracy theory."
I'll give you names, Sarah replied. But first, I need you to understand what you're getting into. The people responsible for this have already killed hundreds of soldiers. They won't hesitate to kill a journalist or his family or anyone else who threatens their operation. Webb had been threatened before, but something in Sarah's voice convinced him this was different. He began taking security precautions, varying his routine, checking for surveillance, and arranging secure communications with his editors and sources. Sarah's next revelation changed everything. She provided Webb with photographs from the Korengal Valley massacre, images she had hidden from military investigators, and managed to preserve despite the attempts to confiscate all evidence. The photographs showed the systematic execution of wounded American soldiers, the stripping of equipment from the dead, and most damning of all, enemy fighters carrying American weapons that had been reported as lost or destroyed in other operations. This is proof of treason, Webb said after studying the images. This isn't just theft or corruption. This is active collaboration with enemy forces. Now you understand why 381 soldiers had to die, Sarah replied. They were getting close to discovering that their own officers were selling weapons to the people killing them. Webb's investigation began slowly, carefully documenting the evidence Sarah provided while protecting his source's identity. He reached out to families of soldiers who had been listed as killed in action, discovering that many of them had reported concerns about missing equipment or suspicious orders before their deaths. He analyzed military casualty reports, finding patterns of deaths that occurred during classified operations with no witnesses or survivors. But the conspiracy's reach was broader than either Sarah or Webb had realized. 3 weeks into Webb's investigation, he was found dead in his apartment, apparently the victim of a heart attack brought on by stress and overwork. His computers had been wiped clean, his files destroyed, and his research disappeared without a trace. Sarah learned about Webb's death through news reports, and she realized her enemies were more sophisticated and ruthless than she had anticipated. They had identified Webb as a threat and eliminated him before he could publish his findings. They had also probably identified her as his source, which meant her carefully constructed false identity was compromised. She had two choices: disappear again, or escalate her campaign of vengeance before they could track her down and kill her. Sarah chose escalation.
Her next target was General Patricia Hayes, the Pentagon official who had signed the original deployment orders for the Korengal Valley mission. Hayes was untouchable through conventional assassination methods, protected by military security, and serving in positions that kept her surrounded by witnesses and guards.
But Sarah had learned something during her months of investigation. Everyone had vulnerabilities, even generals. Hayes had a daughter, Rebecca, who was studying international relations at Georgetown University. Rebecca was idealistic, passionate about social justice, and completely unaware of her mother's involvement in military corruption. She was also naive enough to trust a freelance journalist who approached her with questions about military ethics and the moral responsibilities of soldiers and their families. Sarah, still operating under the identity of Elena Vasquez, began cultivating a relationship with Rebecca Hayes. She presented herself as someone writing a book about the children of military officers, exploring how their parents' careers affected their own moral development. Rebecca was eager to participate, viewing it as an opportunity to discuss her own complicated relationship with her mother's military service. Over the course of several meetings, Sarah gradually introduced information about military corruption, always framing it as hypothetical scenarios or academic discussions. She planted seeds of doubt about the morality of certain military operations, suggested questions that Rebecca might ask her mother about the nature of classified work, and carefully guided the young woman toward uncomfortable truths about the institution her mother served. The breakthrough came when Rebecca mentioned a conversation she had overheard between her mother and another officer about cleaning up loose ends in Afghanistan. Sarah recognized the phrase from her investigation. It was military euphemism for eliminating witnesses or evidence. She encouraged Rebecca to ask her mother directly about the meaning of such language. When Rebecca confronted General Hayes about the overheard conversation, the result exceeded Sarah's expectations. Hayes, caught off guard by her daughter's questions and panicked by the possibility that security had been compromised, made the mistake of trying to silence Rebecca with threats rather than explanations. She told her daughter that some military operations required moral compromises, that soldiers sometimes had to be sacrificed for the greater good, and that asking questions about classified matters could be dangerous for everyone involved. Rebecca was horrified by her mother's coldness and moral flexibility. She contacted Sarah immediately, desperate to understand how the woman who had raised her could speak so casually about sacrificing soldiers' lives.
Sarah revealed carefully selected pieces of evidence about the Korengal Valley massacre, framing it as information she had received from military sources who were concerned about corruption in the Pentagon. The confrontation between Rebecca and General Hayes was devastating for both of them. Rebecca accused her mother of being complicit in the murder of American soldiers. Hayes attempted to justify her actions as necessary for national security, but her daughter's moral outrage shattered the general's carefully constructed rationalization. In a moment of emotional breakdown, Hayes revealed details about the conspiracy that even Sarah hadn't known, including the names of other high-ranking officials involved and the extent of the financial gains they had derived from selling military equipment. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. This is the book. It's about history. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. Sarah recorded everything through surveillance equipment she had planted in Rebecca's apartment. She now had a complete confession from one of the main architects of the Korengal Valley massacre, delivered in the general's own voice, witnessed by her own daughter. But Sarah's victory was short-lived. Hayes realized she had made a fatal mistake and moved quickly to contain the damage. Rebecca Hayes was found dead the next morning, apparently the victim of a mugging gone wrong. Her apartment had been ransacked, her phone and laptop missing, and any evidence of her conversations with Sarah had been destroyed. General Hayes appeared at her daughter's funeral in full military dress uniform, accepting condolences with the stoic dignity expected of a high-ranking officer who had lost a child to random urban violence. But Sarah, watching from a distance, could see the truth in the general's eyes. Hayes had ordered her own daughter's murder to protect the conspiracy. That's when Sarah realized that her enemy wasn't just willing to kill American soldiers to protect their secret. They were willing to kill anyone, including their own families. The corruption had become so pervasive, so protected, that no one was safe from it. Sarah's war of vengeance was about to become something much larger and more dangerous. She was no longer just hunting the people responsible for the Korengal Valley massacre. She was preparing to wage a campaign against an entire system of corruption that reached into the highest levels of American government and military command. The dead soldiers of the Korengal Valley deserved justice, but they also deserved something more. They deserved to be remembered as heroes rather than statistics, as men who died trying to serve their country rather than pawns who were sacrificed for money. Sarah was going to make sure the world knew their names, their stories, and the truth about how they died, even if it meant burning down everything and everyone responsible for their deaths. The explosion at the Pentagon parking garage happened at exactly 6:37 in the morning, during the height of rush hour when the maximum number of witnesses would be present. General Patricia Hayes was walking to her car after an early morning meeting when the improvised explosive device detonated under her government sedan. The blast was powerful enough to flip the vehicle completely over and shatter windows 3 floors up in the Pentagon building, but precise enough to avoid civilian casualties. Sarah Chen watched the news coverage from a hotel room in Virginia, less than 5 miles from the scene of the explosion.
The reporters were calling it a terrorist attack, speculating about foreign enemies who had somehow penetrated the heart of American military security.
They didn't know that the attack had been carried out by a single woman, with a personal vendetta against the most protected military installation in the world.
Hayes survived the explosion, but barely. She was in critical condition at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, with multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and burns over 30% of her body. More importantly, from Sarah's perspective, she was conscious and talking, which meant the interrogation could begin. Sarah had spent 3 months planning Hayes' assassination, but the general's survival changed everything. A dead enemy was a closed case. A wounded enemy was an opportunity to extract information, to force confessions, and to create the kind of public scandal that would expose the entire conspiracy. Hayes' survival was actually better than Sarah had hoped for. Getting into Walter Reed required resources and connections that Sarah had been building for over a year. She used her Elena Vasquez identity to gain access as a freelance photographer, documenting the medical care of wounded veterans. Her press credentials were authentic, her background checks cleared all security screenings, and her reputation for sensitive journalism about military personnel gave her the kind of access that would have been impossible under her real identity. Hayes was housed in a secure wing of the hospital, guarded by military police and monitored by sophisticated surveillance equipment. But Sarah had learned during her months of investigation that every security system had vulnerabilities, usually human ones. She spent 2 weeks studying the hospital's routines, identifying the guard shift changes, the nursing staff's procedures, and most importantly, the times when Hayes was most vulnerable. The opportunity came during Hayes' physical therapy session.
The general was being moved from her room to the rehabilitation center in a wheelchair, accompanied by 2 military police officers and a nurse. Sarah had timed her approach to coincide with a shift change when the guards were momentarily distracted by paperwork and communication with their replacements. She approached the small group in the hallway, dressed in hospital scrubs and carrying a clipboard that made her look like medical staff. "Excuse me," she said to the nurse. "I need to confirm the general's medication schedule before the therapy session." The nurse glanced at Sarah's hospital identification badge and nodded, stepping aside to allow access to the patient. Sarah moved beside Hayes' wheelchair and leaned down as if to check the general's chart. Instead, she whispered directly into Hayes' ear. "Hello, General. My name is Sarah Chen. You remember me. The sniper who died in the Koringal Valley." Hayes' eyes went wide with recognition and terror. She tried to speak, but Sarah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, applying pressure to a nerve point that would cause excruciating pain if Hayes tried to call for help. "Don't make a sound," Sarah whispered. "I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to make you an offer. You're going to tell the world the truth about what happened to those 381 soldiers, or I'm going to make your remaining life very unpleasant." Sarah slipped a small device into the general's hand. It looked like a standard hospital pager, but was actually a sophisticated communication system that would allow Hayes to contact Sarah privately. "Use this when you're ready to talk. You have 72 hours to decide whether you want to confess voluntarily or have the truth extracted from you in much less comfortable circumstances." The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. Sarah walked away from the group, discarded her hospital scrubs in a laundry cart, and left Walter Reed through a service entrance she had identified during her reconnaissance. The guards never realized that Hayes had been approached, and the general herself was too shocked and frightened to report the contact immediately. Hayes didn't use the communication device for 48 hours. Sarah spent that time preparing for both possibilities: a voluntary confession that would expose the conspiracy through official channels, or a forced interrogation that would require much more extreme methods. She preferred the former, but was fully prepared to implement the latter. When Hayes finally made contact, her message was brief and desperate. "What do you want from me?" Sarah's response was equally direct. "I want a complete confession about the Koringal Valley operation. Names, dates, financial records, communications with enemy forces, everything. I want it recorded, documented, and distributed to every major news organization in the country." "You have 24 hours. I can't do that. They'll kill me. General, I've already killed 12 of your co-conspirators. The only reason you're still alive is because you're more valuable as a witness than as a corpse. But that calculation can change very quickly. You killed Morrison, and Johnson, and Williams. I killed everyone I could find who was involved in murdering American soldiers. You're the biggest fish, which means you have the most information and the most responsibility. You can make this easy, or I can make it very difficult for you." Hayes went silent for 6 hours. Sarah suspected the general was trying to contact her co-conspirators, looking for protection or guidance. But Sarah had spent months disrupting their communication networks, eliminating their security personnel, and creating an atmosphere of paranoia that made cooperation nearly impossible. Hayes was isolated, vulnerable, and running out of options. The general's next message came at 3 a.m. "If I give you what you want, how do I know you won't kill me anyway? Because dead witnesses can't testify at congressional hearings. I want justice, General, not just revenge. Justice requires that the truth be told publicly, officially, and completely. Your death would just make you a martyr. Your confession will make you a cautionary tale. Meet me tomorrow night. Walter Reed, loading dock, Building 7, 11 p.m. Come alone." Sarah arrived early, of course. She had studied the loading dock area for days, identifying sight lines, escape routes, and potential ambush positions. She positioned herself with a clear view of the meeting location and multiple options for retreat if the situation turned hostile. Hayes was taking a significant risk by leaving the security of the hospital, which suggested either genuine willingness to cooperate or a trap designed to eliminate Sarah permanently. Hayes arrived exactly on time, moving slowly with the aid of a walker, her burned skin visible even in the dim lighting of the loading dock. She was alone, but Sarah could see the tension in her posture that suggested someone else was watching from a distance. "You look terrible, General," Sarah said, emerging from the shadows with her rifle ready but not aimed directly at Hayes. 3 months of physical therapy will do that to you, especially when you're recovering from an assassination attempt. Not an assassination attempt, a wake-up call.
If I had wanted you dead, you would be dead. Hayes studied Sarah's face, noting the changes that 15 months of living underground had created. The military sniper she remembered had been replaced by something harder, more dangerous, completely focused on a mission that went beyond personal survival. What happened to you, Chen? You used to be one of the good ones. I became one of the betrayed ones. I watched 381 soldiers die because their own officers sold them out for money. I spent months being told that my memories were classified and my evidence was inadmissible. I'd been officially dead for over a year while you and your friends got promoted and decorated for murdering the people we were supposed to protect. It wasn't supposed to happen that way. Then tell me how it was supposed to happen, General. Explain to me how sending American soldiers into an enemy ambush was part of some noble plan. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, looking around the empty loading dock as if checking for witnesses. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired and defeated. It started as financial irregularities. Equipment that went missing, supply convoys that never reached their destinations, weapons that ended up in the wrong hands. We were investigating it, trying to track down the sources of the theft. We? A group of officers who were concerned about the extent of the corruption. Bradley, myself, and a few others. We discovered that the theft wasn't random. It was systematic, organized, coordinated, at the highest levels of military command and defense contracting. Sarah kept her rifle ready, but she was listening carefully. This was information that went beyond what she had learned through her own investigation. The Korengal Valley operation was supposed to be an intelligence-gathering mission. We were going to place surveillance equipment and personnel in a position to monitor suspected arms trafficking routes. The soldiers who were selected for the mission were all people who had reported suspicious activities or asked uncomfortable questions about supply irregularities. So you decided to eliminate them? No. We decided to use them as intelligence assets. They were supposed to gather evidence that would allow us to expose the entire network and bring the people responsible to justice. Hayes was crying now, tears running down her scarred face as she remembered the decision that had destroyed her career, her family, and her conscience. But someone discovered what we were planning. Someone with access to our communications, our operational plans, our personnel files. They turned our intelligence operation into an execution by feeding information about our soldiers' positions and movements to enemy forces. Who? I don't know. That's what I've been trying to figure out for the past year. Whoever did this has access to the highest levels of military intelligence, the ability to manipulate operational orders, and enough influence to cover up the massacre afterward. Sarah lowered her rifle slightly. This was not the confession she had expected. Hayes wasn't claiming responsibility for the massacre. She was claiming to be another victim of the same conspiracy that had killed the soldiers in the valley. You're telling me that you and Bradley were trying to expose the corruption, not participate in it? Bradley was forced into retirement when he started asking questions about what happened to his soldiers. I've been under investigation for months, accused of operational failures and poor judgment. My daughter. Hayes's voice broke completely. Your daughter was killed because she knew too much. My daughter was killed because I tried to protect her by telling her to stop asking questions. When she contacted that journalist, whoever is running this operation decided she was a security risk. Sarah felt a chill as the implications became clear. If Hayes was telling the truth, then Sarah had been hunting the wrong enemies. The officers she had killed might have been corrupt, but they weren't the architects of the Korengal Valley massacre. The real enemy was still out there, still protected, still powerful enough to murder hundreds of soldiers and cover it up completely. Who benefits from the arms trafficking? Sarah asked. Who has the most to gain from systematic theft of military equipment? Defense contractors, foreign governments, criminal organizations. The potential profits are in the hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. But to coordinate something this extensive, to penetrate military intelligence this deeply, you would need resources and connections that go beyond simple criminal enterprise. Hayes reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data storage device. Everything I know is on here. Financial records, communication intercepts, personnel files, operational reports. It's not complete, but it's enough to start a real investigation. Sarah took the device, studying Hayes's face for signs of deception. Why give this to me instead of taking it to your superiors? Because my superiors might be the ones responsible for the massacre. I don't know who to trust in the official chain of command, but I know you're not part of the conspiracy, and I know you have the skills and motivation to use this information effectively. What do you want in return? Help me find who killed my daughter, help me bring the real killers to justice, and help me clear the names of the soldiers who died in the Korengal Valley. Sarah considered the offer. Everything she had believed about the conspiracy was apparently wrong. The officers she had been hunting were victims, not perpetrators.
The real enemy was still unknown, still protected by layers of security and bureaucracy that she hadn't even identified yet. But Hayes's offer also represented an opportunity.
With the general's resources and connections, combined with Sarah's investigative skills and willingness to operate outside the law, they might be able to expose the truth about the massacre and bring the real killers to justice. "If we do this, we do it my way," Sarah said.
No official channels, no military procedures, no bureaucratic protocols. We hunt them down like the criminals they are, and we make them pay for every soldier they killed.
Agreed. And when we're done, you turn yourself in and testify publicly about everything you know. The families of those soldiers deserve to know the truth, and the American people deserve to know how their military was corrupted.
Agreed. Sarah extended her hand to Hayes, sealing their unlikely alliance. The woman who had been hunting the general was now working with her to find the real enemy. It was a dangerous partnership, built on shared guilt and common purpose, but it might be the only way to get justice for the 381 soldiers who had died in the Korengal Valley. Over the following 6 months, Sarah and Hayes worked together to unravel the conspiracy that had led to the massacre. Using Hayes's access to military records and Sarah's skills in surveillance and interrogation, they discovered that the arms trafficking operation was being run by a consortium of defense contractors, foreign intelligence services, and corrupt American officials who had been stealing military equipment for over 5 years. The Korengal Valley massacre had been ordered not to eliminate witnesses, but to eliminate an entire army unit that had been specifically chosen for an intelligence operation designed to expose the trafficking network.
The soldiers had died not because they knew too much, but because they were about to learn too much. The revelation led to the largest military corruption investigation in American history.
Hayes's testimony before Congress exposed the systematic theft of military equipment worth over $2 billion. Sarah's evidence, gathered through methods that couldn't be used in court but could be leaked to journalists, prompted investigations in 3 countries and resulted in the arrest of over 40 individuals. Most importantly, the names of the 381 soldiers who died in the Korengal Valley were finally made public. Their families learned the truth about how they died, and the American people learned about the sacrifice they had made in service of their country. Memorial services were held, medals were awarded posthumously, and the official records were corrected to reflect their heroism rather than classify their deaths as operational failures. Sarah Chen was officially declared alive and awarded the Medal of Honor for her role in exposing the conspiracy. But she declined to attend the ceremony, choosing instead to visit the families of the soldiers who had died in the valley. She spent months traveling across the country, meeting with parents, spouses, and children who had lost loved ones to the massacre. She told them about the courage their family members had shown, the brotherhood they had shared, and the honor with which they had served. The last stop on Sarah's journey was a small cemetery in Colorado, where she visited the grave of Lieutenant Rodriguez. His wife had remarried and moved away, but she had left flowers at the gravesite with a note thanking Sarah for bringing the truth to light. Sarah knelt beside the headstone, placing her Medal of Honor at the base of the grave marker.
"I kept my promise," she said quietly. "They know your name now.
They know how you died. They know you were a hero."
Sarah stood and walked away from the cemetery, disappearing into the Colorado mountains where she had learned to hunt as a child. The woman who had been officially dead for over a year was finally ready to start living again, carrying the memories of 381 soldiers who would never be forgotten, whose deaths had finally been avenged, and whose sacrifice had exposed a corruption that had threatened the very soul of the American military.
The fire that had consumed them in the Korengal Valley had been transformed into a different kind of fire, one that burned away lies and exposed truth, one that honored the dead by ensuring their deaths had meaning. Sarah Chen had kept faith with her fallen comrades, and in doing so, had found a kind of peace that no medal or recognition could provide. The 381 soldiers of the Korengal Valley would be remembered not as casualties of war, but as heroes who died in service of truth. Their names were carved in stone, their stories told to future generations, and their sacrifice honored by a grateful nation that finally understood the price they had paid. In the end, that was the only justice that mattered. Left to burn, 381 soldiers betrayed. A female sniper's return changed fate in a storm of fire.